The Ink and Paint Club podcast is intended for mature audiences. I know we're usually talking about kids' cartoons and stuff, but there's going to be naughty language. Anyway, listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to the Ink and Paint Club podcast, your weekly home for animation reviews and discussions.
Hello, my name is Janette. Here with me this week is my boyfriend Russ. We're taking over for the usual people for the Ink and Paint podcast.
Podcast, honey.
Podcast, yeah. For the Ink and Paint Club podcast, the usual people who do this on vacation, so we're just taking over for a week. We're going to talk about the movie The Land Before Time. We just watched it. It's actually one of my favorite movies. I love dinosaurs. I love Don Bluth, so this movie is just a perfect combination.
It's overall a pretty good movie. I remember not liking it as a child. I was kind of a dinosaur nut, but I think kind of a little more mature as an adult. I can appreciate it for its good points a bit better. It's not to say it's not a flawed movie. It is a very flawed movie, but it is a very well animated, for the most part, movie that's, I think, has stood up to the test of time. We begin the movie with a very beautiful kind of opening shot, starting in the water, and you see this kind of primordial ecosystem as it goes through the water, and then it goes into land, and you see the dinosaurs, and it explains how, like, the current situation. It's not scientifically accurate, but I mean, I wasn't expecting scientific accuracy out of a movie with talking dinosaurs. So the idea is it's kind of this twilight of the age of the dinosaurs, and this famine, food is becoming scarcer, and all of the dinosaurs are kind of migrating to the Great Valley, which is some far-off promised land. And it's about a bunch of dinosaurs going to find food in the place they don't even know if it's real. One thing I had forgotten about this movie, as a kid, I don't think I quite realized how dark it is.
It's a really dark movie.
Because when you hear Land Before Time, you inevitably think of direct-to-video, because 90s sequels and singing dinosaurs with terrible, terrible songs that you get for your 5-year-old to let them watch the TV for an hour and a half or so.
You also remember the Burger King Happy Meal toys.
Yeah, it had a lot of those. God, fucking merchandising everywhere. God damn it. But it's a stupidly dark movie, because at its core, it's about a group of children getting lost in a hostile, alien to them landscape as they are being stalked by a apex predator and slowly starved to death.
While all on their journey to find the Great Valley.
A place that, mind you, they don't even know if it's real. So, yeah, I didn't quite grasp how dark that was when I first saw it as a little kid.
Yeah, this movie is a lot much darker than its Disney counterparts. Like, there's
a lot of, surprising amount of on-screen death. Well, not quite on-screen, but you do, there's the segments where a lot of dinosaurs die, and it's not, like, vague, where, oh, they just disappear. It's like, no, that dinosaur's dead.
Yeah, so we open up the movie with the narrator telling us how the dinosaurs, all the food has disappeared so that dinosaurs can eat, so they're traveling to the Great Valley because there's supposed to be food in the Great Valley. And then they explain that the only time that the dinosaurs stopped on their journey was to hatch our young, and we see multiple of the main characters being born at this point.
I think honestly, the beginning of the movie is its strongest point, because it kind of establishes the world, the kind of current state of things, you know, the reason this mass migration is happening. And you have some very, very strong foreshadowing with several of the protagonists. You see them being born, and their birth scenes kind of highlight kind of introduce you to them and their personality quirks. So, like, Ducky is born, and she just kind of is in awe at all the stuff around her, and then she almost gets killed by a fucking turtle, and kind of highlights her naivety but innocence. And then you have Sarah is born, and she immediately starts charging everything nearby, and panics as soon as there's a thunderstorm. So it highlights how kind of she's headstrong, but deep down she's probably more terrified than anybody else. And then Littlefoot's birth kind of highlights his role as the group's leader, because it's not so much about him, it's about the group that forms around him. So it kind of shows off how he attracts others to him and makes friends. And then from there, it's the exposition is done pretty well, I think, where Littlefoot's mom explains to him about where they're going and why they're doing this.
I really like this scene because basically Littlefoot asks, how does she know the Great Valley exists? And she's just like, I just know.
Yes, it also kind of puts down a theme of the movie, I guess. There are a few themes scattered throughout, and one of the big themes, I think, is kind of about love and faith in those you love, because eventually when Littlefoot's mom is killed, Littlefoot basically doesn't know where the Great Valley is, but he has faith in his mom that she knows what she's talking about, and her directions will get him there safely. I think there's a theme here, and that actually does kind of bring me up to a bit of a criticism for the kind of a blessing and a curse, I think, because this is a movie without that much dialogue, which I think they kind of introduced some themes into the movie that kind of need some more character interaction and dialogue, but at the same time, they do tell a lot through the animation. So I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about with this.
I see. Well, basically, how the movie is the dialogue is very few and far between. It's very pointed. There's no excessive dialogue. It's not like they make funny quips or make jokes like that. The dialogue is very straight, very to the point, meant to develop the story.
Yes, and the dialogue is, for the most part, also very childish, because, again, this is about a group of children wandering the wilderness with a predator stalking them, so they don't make really jokes. They just kind of laugh at each other, like
Be silly.
tripping in the mud, be silly, and play little games and stuff like that.
More so, there's a lot of animation. The scenes that you see are very detailed. There's a lot going on. When things happen, it's not always a fluid motion. Sometimes what the dinosaur is doing is gets interrupted or runs into an obstacle midway of what they're doing, and that's animated as well, and that just draws you into the story. The definite high point of this movie is the animation.
The animation is very, very good in that kind of classical, early Disney style. It's very... A character does something, like Sarah charges through a rock and smashes through it. She's a Triceratops, by the way. So she charges through the rock, smashes through it, and you kind of see her recoil from crashing into the rock. You see the pebbles fly out. You see her kind of stumble for a moment as she just keeps going on. It's very detailed in that regard. Like, a character will fall, and you see, like, vines, they get caught on vines, and then the vines break, or small animals will, like, run away in a panic at something coming crashing towards them. and it's very, very good in that respect.
Yeah, what's amazing is how good this movie still looks, considering it was 1988.
I think it came out in 1988. We're talking animated like the mid to late 80s, and then released in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very pretty movie, if nothing else.
It's definitely worth to watch it just for the animation, even if nothing else really holds up as well as the animation. The animation still holds up really well today.
The animation holds up, and kind of the characters being so childlike also works, because I believe them kind of banding together as to kind of like survive. Like the character interactions with the animation and what dialogue is there works.
Mm-hmm. So basically what happens after the dinosaurs are born, they're traveling with their families. We focus on Littlefoot the Apatosaurus with his mom, and then he runs into Sarah the Triceratops. And Sarah the Triceratops wants nothing to do with him, because in this world, dinosaurs stick to their own kind and don't associate with other dinosaurs. So Sarah's all three horns don't talk to long necks, and when Littlefoot asks his mom about this and why she doesn't want to play with him, Littlefoot's mom is all like, that's just the way it is, don't worry, when we get to the Great Valley, there'll be plenty of long necks for us to hang out with.
Mm-hmm. And then stuff goes south.
Pretty fast.
Pretty fast. One night, Littlefoot wakes up, sees a frog, kind of chases after the frog, and meets Sarah in a marsh where she's also chasing after the frog, and kind of turns into this whimsical, they can get along together after all, as they're just playing in the swamp together. And then the T-Rex comes out and almost kills both of them. And it turns into a pretty desperate panic survival, just run away from the T-Rex as Littlefoot's mom fights the T-Rex.
And Littlefoot's mom fighting the T-Rex is pretty intense. Like we see in the shadows, the dinosaur just rip a chunk of her out.
Yes, this is a G-rated movie, but it actually gets surprisingly gruesome because during the fight, the T-Rex basically manages to latch onto Littlefoot's mom's back and just tears a chunk out of like her back and spine. And you don't actually see it, it's in shadow, but it's still a surprisingly gruesome scene. And then, making things worse, there's a goddamn earthquake. Just a full-blown, like, one of those mediocre
like a
disaster movies from like the mid 2000s, like
20.0 earthquake.
Like that movie where like The Rock flies a helicopter. Like it's that. Where just the like everything just explodes and then like turns into new mountains and everybody dies and it's just terrible. And they get split up and then they're just kind of on their own.
Yeah, Sarah like gets split up from her family. Littlefoot actually watches his mom die, which is the most powerful and sad scene in the movie, I think.
Yes, it is a very, very depressing scene in the movie where he's cut off from his grandparents and he like tries to basically move on with his mother, and his mother just lays there slowly bleeding out as she tells him that she loves her, and then she just dies. And then Littlefoot goes into a prolonged depression where he almost starves to death.
And I actually really like the scene that comes after Littlefoot's mom dying. There's these little flying dinosaurs. They're playing with the cherries. It's really cute. It's really bright. It's really cheerful. And then the one dinosaur, they all get cherries. And then one of the baby dinosaurs tries to bring a cherry to Littlefoot. And just the scene dramatically shifts. Littlefoot is so depressed. And it goes from this cheerful, fun environment to this really depressing one.
You have this little pterodactyl, these little baby pterodactyls and their mother, and they're all playing and fighting over this fruit, and then they don't get the fruit because of passing, they lose it. But then one of the then their mother comes in and just feeds them, and then it kind of highlights how hopeless Littlefoot feels without his mother, because you see this happy family of pterodactyls playing and eating, and then it's just Littlefoot is laying over there in a very, very crippling depression, not really wanting to do anything.
And then Littlefoot finally gets thinks he sees his mother in the shadows, realizes he's alone, and his only way of survive is to make it to the Great Valley. So he starts to walk toward the Great Valley.
Yes, that's where he begins. He runs across a wandering dinosaur who kind of consoles him and teaches him about, that's how life is, and kind of renews his sense to live.
He's the greatest old dinosaur ever. He's all circle of life.
I will say that I think this is kind of where the movie starts to... The flaws of the movie really start to become apparent at this point, because it's still a good movie, the animation is still top-notch, but this is where I think the big problem starts to come into play, the big problem being continuity. I think as a whole, again, the movie is fine, but it doesn't feel, especially towards like the middle of the movie after Littlefoot's mom dies, the movie gets very chaotic in how things happen and how the environments work, which I understand that giant geological event just happened and everything's all out of whack, but it's still very jarring. It doesn't feel like the environment is connected to the next. Like, you have one scene and then another scene, and the environments don't really feel connected to each other in any way.
And there's no transitions between the scenes. It isn't like something happens and there's a transition and something else happens. It's just like a scene, scene end, new scene, scene end, and it just continues.
I think the earliest part of this is with basically Littlefoot meets up with Sarah after his mom dies and kind of offers to bring her along to find the Great Valley. And Sarah decides no, she's not going to do that. She's going to climb into this nearby ravine where the T-Rex fell in. She's going to find a way to cross it by climbing down and climbing back up. So Littlefoot just kind of goes on after that. And he goes on for quite a while and meets a bunch of other characters, and then Sarah, finds the T-Rex, thinks it's dead, and then starts kind of poking its body. And then the T-Rex, of course, isn't dead, so she then runs out of the ravine, and immediately just runs into Littlefoot and the other characters, which... that's kind of the point, is how far did Littlefoot travel? What's the time frame for all of this? It just doesn't add up, and it does kind of, I think, detract from the movie, which up until this point has actually been fairly tightly done.
And the characters are just wherever the characters need to be. And another thing is, the characters are whatever size they need to be. Character shapes, like for example, when the T-Rex is chasing Littlefoot, he's huge, and then there's this tiny thing of thorns that the baby dinosaurs are in, and suddenly the T-Rex is going in the thorns after them, and he's just surrounded by thorns, and somehow he's just shrunk.
Yes, like I said, consistency. Not the movie's strong suit, because characters shrink depending on where they are and what they're doing, and it just gets kind of jarring in places. It kind of, especially towards the mid to later parts of the movie, it feels very much like not so much a movie as several segments kind of strung together into a movie.
I really feel like the money started to run out at the end of this project.
I think so too. I don't know really anything about the production history of this, except that apparently it was Irish, which is, I did not know that before looking it up on Wikipedia. This was apparently an Irish movie. That's weird. But you kind of get the feeling that either a lot was left on the chopping room floor, or they just started to run out of the budget towards the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. kind of tying in with the environments not making any sense. It starts out kind of realistic. I mean, desolate, but realistic for the environments. And then kind of towards the middle of the movie, the kind of environments that the characters are navigating go from desolate but realistic to just full-on hellish. And I found that kind of weird. Like, I understand it kind of fits with the tone of the movie, but it was really distracting where they're going from, like, this desolate wasteland to literally, like, a video game level set in hell.
Complete with lava and tar pits.
Yes, that's another scene. After Sarah leads the other characters away from Littlefoot on what she perceives to be an easier trail, they wander into this volcanic hellscape with, like, tar pits and erupting volcanoes everywhere and lava flows, and it's just terrible. And then all the characters get in trouble. They call for help, and Littlefoot, who is going the exact opposite direction,
suddenly appears,
just comes charging towards them, and like starts saving them. And then like there's a scene where Petrie the pterodactyl is in a tar pit, so all of the other characters rush in to save, all the characters except Sarah rush in to save him. And then they all get stuck in the tar pit, and that cuts to Sarah being chased by other dinosaurs. And then suddenly, like, they don't show how Littlefoot and the others get out of the tar pit. They're just now covered in tar and, like, all sticking together so they look like some sort of monster, and walk towards Sarah and save her from the other dinosaurs by scaring them away. There's a lot of just scenes like that where there's no transitionary scenes in parts of it where, like, how did this happen exactly? It just kind of gets a little jarring, especially gets worse as the movie goes on.
Mm-hmm. So basically these dinosaurs travel together. Because the dinosaurs are supposed to only hang out with their species, they learn to put that aside and hang out with each other even though they're all different dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just end the movie by murdering the Sharptooth and finding the Great Valley.
Yes, the movie, I think, also kind of lacks a proper climax, because they kind of get chased by the T-Rex, and then kind of towards the end, they decide they're going to get rid of the T-Rex by basically tricking it to getting into a body of water and then pushing a rock onto it so that it basically gets a concussion and drowns.
There's no typical movie arch point of the build-up, the rising action, the climax, then the falling action. Stuff just happens in this movie, one event after another. Mm-hmm. And it's just basically a series of events that happen.
Now, speaking of the movie's defense, it's kind of sloppy at points, but because of the scenario of a bunch of children wandering a hostile wilderness, it's not as bad as it could be, because, again, it's a group of children wandering a hostile environment towards a goal they don't even know is real. Yeah. So the kind of jarring editing isn't as bad as it could be, because it kind of does put you in with the kids kind of struggling to survive and find their way.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear, I have my criticisms of this movie, but I really like this movie. I think it's great. It just hits those emotional points so well. Like, it's just the saddest thing in the world when Littlefoot's mom dies. It's not like the Disney movies where they just die off spring and you're like, oh, it's so sad. You get really emotionally involved in this. You get really emotionally involved in other scenes where the characters interact with each other, where the characters there's this point where Sarah and Littlefoot just have this huge fight, and everyone is upset over it.
Mm-hmm.
It's able to connect with its audience on an emotional level.
I think that is probably another one of the movie's great strengths is it does work well with emotion, because you do feel kind of actual terror when you see the T-Rex move around and chase them.
Mm-hmm. I think the most powerful part of the movie is when Littlefoot is grieving with his mother, over his mother. I think that's the easiest part for the audience to connect with.
I'd agree.
Yeah, and it's just like, it captures grief so well, and it's just so sad. Littlefoot gets so excited when he sees a shadow that he thinks is his mother, But it's not his mother. It's just him.
It's his shadow in the distance. It's very sad. But...
And just Littlefoot's naivety, in a sense, when his mother is dying, and he doesn't want to admit that his mother is dying. He's trying to tell her to get back up, that she's always going to be with him. And the audience knows what's going on. They know that Littlefoot's mom is dying, and that just makes it all the more heart-wrenching.
You're watching a child learn what death is, and it captures that very well. I do think I also really like the T-Rex. One, because I like T-Rexes. I'm a weirdo with a probably unhealthy obsession with dinosaurs, especially the T-Rex. But I think they did the T-Rex... One thing I kind of like about the T-Rex is done very, almost realistically, in that it's clearly half insane from hunger and injuries. They don't really show the injuries in that much detail, but when it first appears, it basically gets a bramble bush jammed into its eye, and it clearly is
blind in that eye from that point on.
The eye is clearly wounded and possibly getting infected. And the T-Rex is the reason the T-Rex is stalking the group so much is because it's half insane from just starvation and being seriously wounded like that. And that makes its kind of relentless assaults when it appears really, really terrifying because it's just so desperate and angry and just driven.
Sure, the T-Rex, or as it's called in this movie, Sharp Tooth, wants to eat a bunch of baby dinosaurs, but you can't completely hate the dinosaur.
That's another theme of the movie, I think, is kind of survival. And how, kind of unity for survival. Because it's mentioned, like Janette said, the dinosaurs kind of kept to their own kind before this kind of great cataclysm. But you have the reason the group is able to survive is because they are willing to unite to kind of overcome their challenges and, survive together. So, I think that was a pretty powerful theme in the movie, too.
Yeah. And basically all these dinosaurs come together. Each of them is important to the survival. Without every single one, they wouldn't have all survived.
Mm-hmm.
They need each other. And basically, and one of the big things with this movie is basically you need to work with other people. You can't just keep to yourself. That's what Sarah tries to do. Sarah fights working with the other dinosaurs as long as possible, and all it does is cause her pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm. It almost gets her and everybody else killed, and really just being so headstrong just causes problems for the entire group.
But once they work together, they all make it to the Great Valley. They're reunited with their herds, but that was only possible because they all work together.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I like about this movie is not a complicated movie. It's a simple movie with easy to understand themes. I mean, this movie was meant for children.
It's a kids movie, and it's not a super deep kids movie at that, but I think overall I'd say there's enough for this movie if you just like animation.
I mean,
it's worth watching.
It's got a good message. It's an hour and 9 minutes long.
It is a really short movie, too. I never realized that as a kid.
Yeah, you can easily just say, I'm going to watch this and then get on with your evening. I just like to put it on on the weekend when I have nothing else to do, and I'm like, I want to watch The Land Before Time.
Yeah, it's actually not a bad movie to kind of have on the background while you're, doing something if you're into animation. One final really important things I'll highlight about this movie is that unlike literally every other Land Before Time movie, this one is not a musical.
And it's animated by Don Bluth, which none of the others are.
Yes, it was overseen by Don Bluth, so it has, again, that kind of classic early Disney art style. And I can't really say for sure with the other Land Before Time movies, because I haven't seen them all, and the last time I saw any of the others was when I was 7. But I think the movie works kind of as this tale of survival, and unity in the face of, danger.
It's a good message.
It's a good movie. It has a good message.
I mean, it's a little weird to watch and not have those transitions, but overall, I found it a really good experience. I really enjoyed it. I really love this movie.
Mm-hmm. If you can get over the kind of choppy composition and continuity towards the end.
Yeah, it's not a perfect movie.
Excuse me. It's okay. It's overall pretty good. I have no idea about the other movies because I haven't seen them in years, and I seem to recall hating them as a kid, so...
Didn't you love that little baby T-Rex in the second movie?
That was because I was a weird kid who liked the idea of dinosaurs eating people, so yes.
No, that's the different Don Bluth movie. We're back, A Dinosaur Story.
That was that was actually, that was a really trippy movie.
I actually want to rewatch that movie.
I haven't seen that in years.
I remember my mom recorded it for us on VHS, and I watched it once. But I think I want to go back and see it. Anyway, do we have anything else we want to add?
Not really related to Land Before Time, but I heard about this because I was just reading on Wikipedia because I'm a nerd who doesn't have that much to do sometimes. I was reading about dinosaurs just on Wikipedia and clicking links and just following that and just reading a bunch of shit. But there's this theory about Deinonychus, a species of raptor, where I found it really, really amazing. Basically theorizing how they might have possibly hunted. Deinonychus had feathers on it. So imagine you're walking through the woods in dinosaur times. Excuse me. And then you just see what looks like a rather large pigeon. And it just kind of looks at you. And it looks at you. And then it just, jumps on top of you and starts biting your face off.
I knew that's what The Land Before Time was lacking.
Yes. Just giant pigeons just jumping on you and eating you alive. Not like in Jurassic Park where they're all...
tiny.
These weren't... they weren't that big. They weren't as big as what you would see in Jurassic Park, and they didn't run around like Sonic or anything, but you just kind of walk up, casually jump on you, and start biting you. And that idea just amuses the heck out of me, of a flock of pigeons just deciding to, start biting your face off.
I need that movie.
I mean, I would watch that. But, yeah, I just wanted to share that. There's a theory about how some species of raptor might have hunted by just stalking an animal, jumping on it, and eating it alive.
It's The Land Before Time, the pigeon story.
You're not good at coming up with names for things. That's why you're not allowed to name any more cats.
Okay.
So that's it. Thank you for listening if you got this far.
Watch the movie.
Watch the movie, and bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ink and Paint Club podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can catch a new episode every week. Also be sure to follow us on our Facebook and Twitter so you can keep up with the show. Links are in the description. We'll see you next week.